Hi everyone. In this video, I want to explain the changes I did for a review of a patron's work. This is the review itself, the overpay, and this one is the original. In the original, you can see that the character looks very sorrowful, very sad, and I really like that because the fact that I can notice that right away means that the attempt to depict that kind of emotion is very earnest. Okay, I can see the effort behind the rendering, the drafting of the elements that comprise the character. However, one of the first things I wanted to address, because I also noticed it right away, was the lack of solidity. And by that I mean that when you have these kinds of scenarios where the clothing covers most of the body, you have to make a point to show the body through that clothing. So you can see that in the overpin, I changed the action of the left hand. In the original, the left hand is grabbing the skirt, and it is also the same action in the overpin. However, the location is key because I changed the location between the knees, so it was tucking in the skirt, and that creates these shapes on the thigh, for example. This is the upper plane of the thigh. There are some creases product of the action. You can see the lateral side of the thigh with that shadow shape. You can see the knee, which is almost spherical. The shading is almost spherical. And you are seeing some diaper folds, some cylindrical folds that are being created from the tension point, which is the knee itself. Okay, so that alone already gives more solidity to the body. As you can see, she looks more like she's sitting with all her weight on top of the rock formation. Another clue that gives us that impression is that I use the extra skirt to show the rock formation itself. You can see an upper plane that is appearing here. You can see the corner that is changing the plane, and you're also seeing some of the rock formation cutting through the skirt. I mean, it's not a literal cut; it's more like a visual one, but it is giving a sense of presence to the body because you are seeing that the body is interacting with the environment. Okay, um, the shadows themselves are also important to show presence. For example, you can see that here the shadow is very soft. In the original, you are not seeing much shadow. You are mostly just seeing an overlap of element, which is important. But if you want to render further, you will need to show shading in some key parts of the composition. Here, for example, this soft shadow is called an occlusion shadow. An occlusion shadow occurs when you have two elements that are very close to each other. So that creates a very narrow space where the photons of the light are not able to enter. So a shadow shape starts appearing as a very diffuse one, and that grounds the skirt on top of the shoes. You can see the difference between the original and the overpaint here, and that also grounds further the character. Um, let's move to the head because in the original I see that the expression is very clear. However, I also saw that the construction of the head suffered a bit, and I suspect this was because there was there was it was given a higher priority. The hair was probably drafted before the construction of the skull, so that you as an artist are going to have a harder time when you put details on top of a model of a structure. In this case, the skull is the structure. So try to construct the skull before putting any details on top of it. Even things like the eyes, the mouth, the nose are details on top of the skull. So I decided to remove some of that hair, not only to have a easier time trying to construct the skull, but also to increase the readability for other viewers too. So you can see that the expression is more clear here because the hair is not longer on top of most of her face, but also the structure is more solid. Another thing I noticed in the original is that the eye is too surface level. You have to remember that the eye is sitting inside of the eye socket, so you have to make a point to make the eye feel as it's buried enough into the skull. And one good indicator of that is that the eyebrow will be more forward from the eyeball. The eyeball is going to be a bit behind the eyebrow. Here is like a 45 angle. Obviously, this is not an exact rule. It's more like a general one, a general advice. And in this one, the angle is a bit more vertical. Okay, so you have to be very careful with that. The ear is also too narrow. As you might remember from past videos, I tried to make a half heart shape here and try to depict this section here as a Y letter. Those things are going to help you, just like the eyeball thing, are going to help you construct in a more precise way the ear. Okay, let's see what else. The composition. I like the composition because it gives you a sense of isolation, and I feel that there was a bit too much space that could be occupied by the sky and increase that is isolation further. And sometimes you have to seek changes, seek opportunities to do two things at once. For example, here I wanted to preserve that extra space, but give them reason to have that extra space. And I also wanted to focus the viewer gaze into the character a bit further. So you can see that here I implemented a vignette effect with the sky. So this section is darker, so you can focus a bit more into the mid section of the composition. And the space is retained, just like here. There is a more subtle vignette effect because I no longer have the sky as an excuse to create a darker shapes or to render those clouds. Are very subtle, but they are noticeable and increase that sense of space and environment. Okay. Another thing that my patron said was that the sword came off a bit flat. And yeah, I noticed that it was flat, and I tried to change the heel. I think it's called heel. This base, this structure here. And as you can see, I try to make a point to show at least two planes of the same object. And what that gives me is a change in perspective. It makes the object more feel more three-dimensional. The sword itself is the same. However, that object alone is giving me an extra sense of space. So you have to be very selective about what kind of elements are going to give you a sense of three-dimensionality to your objects. It doesn't have to be everything, but there had to be some key elements. And those key elements usually are going to show more than two planes, because with two planes, you have corners, you have vertices, and you can tell the viewer, oh, this is a 3D object. Another thing that I also wanted to make a point was to show a bit more, uh, in a more clear way, her fingers. Because as you can see in the original, this is not very clear. You have to zoom in to start seeing the division of the fingers. I took advantage with the globe of the globe to really square off those fingers. You can see that I started here with the far fingers, because those far fingers are not going to show as many planes as the near ones. There are basically just two planes. One that is facing upwards is catching light, and one that is facing downwards that is in shadow. With the near one, you can see that there is a lateral plane, the upper plane, and the one that is facing down. I am basically just using two values, as you can see. So with the fingers, sometimes it's better to square them off than don't depict them at all. You can use placeholders, of course, and I will say that in the original, this was like a placeholder, but you have to refine those features further to really convey in an effective way what you want. In this case, the fingers. Okay. Another thing I noticed was with the skull, and this is related to the construction of the skull too. There is this shortcut I use with the back of my skulls, where the bottom plane of the skull is short and is concave, and the upper plane of the skull is taller but is convex. You can see tall and convex, and this one is short and concave. That alone gives you a more characteristic shape for the skull. And let's see what else. You can see that the rock formation was further refined in the overpaint. I decided to keep things simple to do two things. I was just going to use two values, and I was going to desaturate the background because we are dealing with a sketch, right? And we are using the saturated values with the character because it's the most important elements. And we are using grayish values for the background because we don't want to, we want, sorry, to create a contrast between the character and the background. And that change in saturation is giving off that contrast. So yeah, those are most of the changes I enacted with the character, and I hope this was useful to you. I am going to include the time lapse right after I finish this and this voiceover section of the video. And if you want to submit your artwork, I have this service on my Patreon, and you can submit one artwork per week, and you will also instantly get all my other exclusives with this tier. It's the critical tier, and I hope these kind of reviews are helpful to you. Also, on my Patreon, you will find other reviews I cannot upload because those are for non-safe for work pieces. I also review my own work. I also annotate those works. And let me know if you have something that was not clear to you, if something was not very, if you were not convinced. I try to make a point to explain everything I do. And I hope, as I said, to have been helpful to you. And thanks for watching. Bye.